So here are my reactions to the Module 2 discussion board. Generally speaking, I found that it was a much better discussion. It was much more tied to content, which is great. And not only was it more tied by being more tied to content, I found that it was much more interesting. Some people even pointed to specific page numbers or sections of videos. And in response to that, other people said, "Oh, I'm going to go back and reread that more closely and understand that more closely." And that is all excellent. I saw a couple people, it suggested other readings or reminded them of other readings that they've done in other places, other classes, and that's terrific. Um, Put a link in, and oftentimes I'll include that the next time I teach the course. I do a lot with student recommendations of content, so that's good. Um, and the other thing is, I know you have a minimum number of posts, and some posts have gotten multiple responses, and that's great. But there is no maximum number of posts, and I would really like it if everybody got some response to their post. That everybody who put something up, somebody looked at. So especially when you're coming in towards the end, if you would scroll through and see posts that have zero responses yet and post a reply, that would be awesome. The more posts, the merrier. We only got a couple of modules left. The more the merrier in that. Now, I'm not going to name anybody's names because then people feel left out if I don't name your name. But I've read every single post and I've quite enjoyed them. And even if you don't hear a direct response to some of your content, I have read it and it was meaningful to me and I enjoyed it. Also, in this response reaction summary, I'm going to push back a little bit, try to take the other side of the story, stir things up, um, that kind of thing, because it's easy to get into, I think, this loop, and I don't know if it's 100% what we want to be doing, and try to sharpen our critical thinking facilities. So I'm going to start with the concept of the Thrive app from Arianna Huffington, which I looked up. And, now I found that sort of very meta. And there was another post further down on the flip side of this about how many aches and pains that we're getting from our use of technology. But the idea of that I need technology to help me manage my technology, which is a really sort of interesting concept. I can't help myself. I need some sort of guidance, and I'm going to get that through the use of technology. One thing I will tell you is don't use your cell phone as a alarm clock. Just buy a different alarm clock, or use your watch maybe, which turns into your iWatch. Um, if you don't use your cell phone as an alarm clock, you won't wind up scrolling through your notifications first thing in the morning and last thing at night, because that won't be the last piece of technology that you touch. You could put it away, do something else, and you could save yourself a lot of time. It is true that since the beginning of our use of computer-based technology, and really technology in general, but computer-based technology specifically, that we've had a lot of physical problems from that. There was a great image which I could not find of how you look when you're looking into your cell phone and standing, and it's a little strange. Back in the days when computers got big, everybody got metacarpal syndrome. So that is a real interesting thing. So it's pervaded our lives in different ways. It's distorted us physically. It gives us physical ailments, and we can't control it on our own. We need to use the technology itself to help us control the technology. On the other hand, I do have to say, I do like it when my watch gives me a notice to stand up, and I do stand up. One of the problems with this response, by the way, is it's going to be a little longer than I like. There was so much good stuff that I knew it was going to run long, and I'm going to try to tighten it, but it's going to be a little longer. So everybody engaged deeply with Sherry Turkle, and she was clearly the centerpiece of the module. And it's really interesting with Sherry Turkle. I've actually given talks to her. She started out as the really positive and excited about the possibilities of interacting online. We would be free to express different aspects of our personalities when we weren't so constrained by the norms and rules and cues and expectations and assumptions and prejudices and biases of everything that come with face-to-face communication. We'd be freed from judging people by the fixed characteristics like age, looks, gender, hair, all that kind of thing. And in that way, freed from all those external sort of elements, we would be more of who we are. We could be more authentic online rather than less authentic. I'm not sure that's worked out that way in her view or in others. And especially as online interaction has begun to consume more and more percentage of our life, we have the feeling that there's more and more tailoring, inauthenticity, presentation, that kind of thing. But is that really less us than other ways of interacting? Was she actually wrong in that first iteration? And maybe that's more us or more comfortable, and just as real and as authentic as any other part of us. Now, here's somebody I'm going to recommend. Since the 1950s, there's a great sociologist called Erving Goffman who has argued we've always just present parts of ourselves in any interactional context. And we all know this intuitively. When you walk into a face-to-face classroom, it's quite different than when you walk into your house and you interact with your parents or your children in quite different ways than you interact with your friends or with strangers or with teachers or with classmates. Now, because we've learned how to act or interact at all those different stages. And it could be that we're just learning how to present X part of ourselves online too, because it's just a different context. And then, and it's not less authentic, it's just new authentic. That said, the question now of authenticity and experience is central for us. And part of that is because so many experiences are available to us and we don't know really what to say. And maybe that's fragmenting us and there is no unified whole to us at all and we just want to accept that. Or maybe we live in a fantasy world. I don't know. The point is that to dismiss our mediated experience and our mediated interaction as somehow less or inauthentic, I don't know, is 100% right. So I once went to a funeral of a relative of mine, and I heard his coworkers eulogizing him, and I was like, what? That's not the person I knew at all. I knew somebody completely different because the way he interacted in the family setting was dramatically different than the way he interacted in the work setting. But they were both parts of him. So maybe the way we interact in an online setting is still a real part of you. And if we are the accumulation of our experiences, those experiences online might be just as real. The flip side of that, I don't want to go too far, is when my son, when he was about 8 or 9, said he wanted to go skateboarding. I said, you don't know how to skateboard? He said, I watched a lot of YouTube videos on it. I go, I don't know if that's going to work. And I'm also going to take the other side of the merits of face-to-face interaction. I think face-to-face interaction is highly overrated. As a matter of fact, I'm now having this weird experience that a lot of time in terms of work meetings, I find that you get more work done if you mediate it through Zoom than if you actually gather together in the room. There's less, it's more focused, there's less um, waste, kibitzing, joking around. It's easier to share documents. It's actually more effective. Now I'm seeing myself via video and seeing my colleagues. I think the video component is important, but it's by mediating ourselves through our computers. We're in a more comfortable setting. We're in our offices, that kind of thing. It's more effective. I think that this is really weird, but in reality, in practice, face-to-face interaction a lot of times is boring. A lot of times you just don't have really anything to say to the other person, and you can't find what to say. And when it's not boring and you're searching around looking for conversation, how to make conversation. And a lot of times when it's not boring, a lot of times it's upsetting. People are saying stuff that you're uncomfortable with, or it's mundane, or it's trivial. And personally, I was a journalist, so this was really weird because did this for a living, but I was always felt uncomfortable calling people on the telephone. And I'm not a millennial. It always seemed, I don't know, I didn't like it. Never sure what's going to happen, especially people I didn't know really well or weren't my friends and that kind of thing. Texting to me in so many cases just seems so far superior and so much more comfortable. Number one is you don't feel like you're bothering the person. If they don't want to respond to your text, they don't do it, which is awesome. Number two is you don't require full attention, and a lot of people don't want to give you full attention. And number two, a lot of times when you want to interact with somebody, it doesn't require full attention, and that means even if they're sitting right next to you. I'm just saying this to be provocative. I'm not 100% convinced, but I am convinced that gathering a lot of times in place with people, you don't got to be talking to them. You just like to be around them. So rather than comparing what's going on in texting and the snippets of information and this not being fully present where you are, rather than compare that to the pleasure of an engaged conversation with somebody, it should really be compared to the mundane reality. What did people used to do when they were face to face together in the past? And to a large degree, not much. Watched a lot of TV. A lot of television was on, and prior to that, I used to joke in one of my classes, people would sit out there on the porch and go, looks like it's going to be nice weather. Not much. So we don't want to idealize what's happened on face-to-face. On the flip side, can you build the same kind of relationships, mediated and not mediated? Well, certainly not the same kind. Certainly relationships that have a physical component and have had what I'll call a shared space component and a more intimate component are different. But not every case better, and in not every case more fulfilling. So maybe we're adding, not subtracting. The whole idea of people can't talk to each other anymore, I'm not sure if people ever have been able to really talk to people. People have been really shy. People have been reticent. Most of us are not very, I'm not going to speak for you, but a lot of times it's hard to strike up conversation. So it's certainly, people are interrupted now, but this actually might, some ways, be better for a lot of people. I know for myself, I'm really happy that I have often happy that I have the option of texting and not having to be engaged. And I just don't think in a lot of face-to-face settings, there is that sustained interaction. The last point I think about a lot is, and I did this, I was a kid pre-video games. We used to play a game called pinball, and there was a a lot of times we would just be sitting around with my friends, and one person's playing pinball and the rest of us are watching. And I saw this once again with my children, where one person be playing a video game and the other people be watching. I thought that is the weirdest thing. Or even if you go to a spectator sport, there is something charming about being in physical proximity with other people that you like a lot of times, going to games, but you don't have to be interacting all the time. As a matter of fact, in my family, my father often just wanted my mother to be around in the house, and they didn't really feel the need to interact with each other. And I see that in actually a lot of long-term relationships. People like to be with each other, but they're not talking. And the fact now, once again, I don't want to go too far. When I'm in my car, my kids are texting or not with me. A lot of times, especially if I haven't seen them in a while, go, who are you talking to? What are you doing? Can't we interact with each other? Can't I draw your time away from that? And it's not easy. Now, a lot of people feel isolated, and they feel isolated whether they're online or not online. And one of the reasons we feel isolated is because we live in isolated lives. We don't live in community. We don't hang out with our neighbors. And the sense of isolation has been around since urbanization, since we moved into the city and started to live day-to-day life surrounded by people we don't know on an ongoing basis. But if you read any Ralph Waldo Emerson, you know living in a small town is also crummy. Everybody's in your business. You're constrained by whatever role that you're put in, and there's a lot of limitations. I've been fascinated by the impact of social media on self-esteem. I do not know why people feel like they have to compare themselves nonstop. I don't know why they look at people's happy Facebook posts and think that that's people's happy lives and that's all. People have good times, they post it and want to share it. You have bad times, you don't want to share it, and that's natural. I mean, at least for myself, there's certainly the concept of, you see somebody you haven't seen in a while, say, how you doing? And they go, oh, not that good, terrible, I've had all these problems. You go, oh, that wasn't really the question that I was asking. I was just making chit chat. I was being polite, and you don't really want to engage in them in their bad behavior, in their bad times. You were just sort of being polite. Why would I share all that with social media, especially when I know my followers are a lot of people who don't really know me well and don't really care that much about me, but are interested enough to hear the good things that are going on in my life, don't want to hear the bad things. And that sort of mediated social comparison has been an ongoing issue. I've never understood why women compare themselves to airbrushed supermodels in magazines, but apparently they do. And apparently it leads to all sorts of awful things like anorexia and other bulimia, eating disorders, low self-esteem. And there's a lot of research that shows the more engagement with media you have, the more those disorders come. And it's clear that social media opens up a lot more ways to compare your lives to other people's lives. And I'm not sure why people do that. And there's a lot more ways to seek approval from others. So this seems to me a real issue. I don't understand why, but this is a real issue that's been ongoing with mass media to a large degree. And it's tough. You even, want people to respond. And I remember when Instagram first came out and kids would post something and then look and to see how many likes they got over periods of time. And it was strange. So I think people might have noticed that Twitter has now raised its limit to 280 characters. And I'm not 100% sure how communicating through emojis and character limitations really change us by being that crisp and that sort of flow and all that kind of thing, and the randomness of news feeds and that kind of thing, and the putting us on nonstop surveillance on different levels of the world, from our friends, from our business associates, from people we're just interested in, to celebrities, to politicians, and we're sort of surveying that, scanning that on a nonstop basis is an important, good question. I think it does make a difference. I actually hate getting all these I was a news junkie and still hate getting notifications nonstop on my phone. I'd be happy to just read the paper morning and night and that kind of thing. I do know that we're getting into areas with this that are very worrisome and troublesome, in the sense that we don't know what the heck we're doing. So we're building what's called artificial intelligence, which, without knowing what natural intelligence is, and not really having an idea or a definition of intelligence. We're building what's called virtual reality worlds, where we don't really have, as we see, we don't have a good idea of what real reality is. And then we have that interim of augmented reality, which Google tells us next year is going to be huge. And I'm not 100% sure I understand it, but I think that it's going to be new and it's going to be different. Certainly the way we changing the way we contextualize the world, the touch points we have the world, what's important to us in the world, what's not important, and what kinds of experiences seem to be available to us. I liked it. A lot of people talked about, and I like this, that it reinforces the social media, to a large degree reinforces the social conditions we find ourselves in. If we are lonely, social media is not going to help us overcome our loneliness. Even through those interactions, we still, to some degree, feel lonely. And if we're social, it's just fun. It's just another way. It's just another element of our overall interactions. This is even running longer than I wanted, so I'm going to sort of skim over some of the next points, but there's no doubt that being always connected seems to raise our anxiety. Many people thought back to the days of telephone. You'd get in your car, you were out of touch. You couldn't be calling your parents or your friends or your children whenever you had a thought cross to your mind. But if you think about telephones already was a pretty cool way. If both of you are in your house and had the phone, you could talk to each other even if you're a couple thousand miles away. Think of the days of letters. When you left, you were gone. And when I grew up, when I went away to college, talked to my parents once a week on the phone, which was nice. Then I traveled abroad, no contact at all. Sent letters, didn't have contact at all. That was anxiety for them, I guess. For me, not that much. But I'm not 100% sure which is better or not. Now, my son, I send him a text, and if he doesn't respond in an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, it's annoying. It's annoying. Do I get worried? Well, I've learned not to get worried right now, but a lot of times it can be worrying, especially if you're expecting them to be able to respond to them. The idea of attention span and short attention span is very interesting. Once again, really since the growth of TV, we've been getting information thrown at us in these shorter units and crosscuts and short bursts and that kind of thing, and 10-minute groupings, 8-minute groupings, news stories 1 minute, so that that trend has been there for a long time before social, but the constant interruption, the uh, beeping and the buzzing and the something all the way always in front of you to take, even the clicking when I first started doing web development in the 90s, and saying every time you put a link into something, you're saying stop paying attention to what you're paying attention to and go somewhere else. And I do think that that's a change, and a change not necessarily for the better. And I do think that it seems that people have a much harder time to be able to apply themselves in some sustained way. The ability to read a book or not read a book, I don't think most people had reality, the ability to read large portions of books in one time anyhow. 30, 40 pages was probably enough, and then you had to take a break, walk around. But that's harder now because there's so many other things saying, nah, stop paying attention to that, do this, do that, do the other thing. By the way, a lot of people talked about how wonderful audiobooks were in the car, and they are. And I've personally have gotten into, for long car rides, podcasts, and make the car ride goes much faster. And then you get into this interesting sort of concept, because you are multitasking, you're driving, but driving takes such little part of your brain if you're a slow driver like myself. And then I could listen to long podcasts, although podcasts, of course, are built in ways to keep, they're built in segments and music and that kind of thing. The question is Google making us smarter or stupider? That's a tough question. One thing is, what technology in general does is we're remembering or not remembering different things. Never really have to ask anybody for directions anymore. And sometimes I was tutoring in a school last year, and because there was traffic to where it goes, I always would use my GPS to route me around the traffic, so I never really learned the route, because every day I was taking a different route. That was better, save myself time, never learn the route. Now, a lot of times, you want to get somebody's phone number in your cell phone, they call or text you, you save it as a contact, you have no idea what their number is, ever. No clue. None of it. Does that mean we're remembering better stuff? I don't know. And the last thing I guess that I really want to talk about is the use of terms, because I like words, and it's interesting the different terms, that Facebook picked friends. That's certainly the basis of the word friend. LinkedIn uses a different term. Twitter is followers. You could have contacts. I think LinkedIn is contacts. All that implies a social relationship that is different. A friend is different than a follower. And it also implies a different interactional expectation. But it's certainly broadening those interactional expectations that we have. So there are fundamental and profound differences and changes that are going on. I push back on the idealization of the past, of face-to-face. Maybe that's just going to be more limited to more intimate relationships. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe having all these options allows people to, one, present themselves more in ways they want to present themselves because they are more under control, and that's actually a good thing, and allows them to present themselves more appropriately as well. So just a last thought, I think about office hours for professors. So it used to be, and this is still the structure in schools, professor would have office hours. You're entitled at that point to show up in the professor's office hours and talk to the professor about whatever it is. And that's fine on some level and good and whatever, although, most professors have office hours, nobody would ever show up. And then it got to be, call me before you come to office hours, we will make an appointment. And we'll have an appointment. And this isn't just professors, this is in business and all over. Then it became, I'll send you an email to set up a time to call me to set up a time to set up an appointment. And then it became, text me to let me know that you've emailed me, to let me know that you're going to call me, to let me know that you want to set up an appointment. Now, a lot of the business could just be done by text. Just text me and we'll do the business, and we don't have to set up an appointment. If we want to set up an appointment, if you're in a company, a lot of times you could just look to see when people are available, say, I'd like to meet with you at this time, and the person could say yes or no, accept the invite or not accept the invite. Seems to me, to a large degree, it's being more efficient. What's gone away? Phones. Almost never talk to anybody on the phone. And for me, as you know, I'd rather than talk to the phone, I'd rather Zoom or FaceTime. I think that that's much better than phone. Maybe phone technology really was not all that good. And it was just an interim technology, really good for 50 years, but now it's gone away. I just say that as speculation. A lot of people want email to go away. I don't think that that's a very efficient technology, and in many settings I think I have to agree with them. So we're in these changing moments of the way we interact with each other, the way we present ourselves to each other, the way we receive the presentations of others to each other. But I want to push back to say it's necessarily worse.